All right, folks, thanks for being here today. We have Natalya Zernitskaya, who is a candidate for Santa Monica City Council. Thank you very much for being here today. We appreciate you coming in. Why don't you take a few minutes at the start to tell folks who you are and why you're running for office?
Sure. So my name is Natalya Zernitskaya. I have been part of the Santa Monica community for about 10, 12 years. I've been living in the Santa Monica city proper for about 10 years, but I've been a community advocate for about 12. So I've been volunteering here since before I even lived here. I'm uniquely qualified to serve as a city council member because of my combination of lived experiences, professional experience. I'm a financial analyst in my day job, as well as my history of community advocacy and just connections with all the different community groups here in Santa Monica. I've served as president of the League of Women Voters of Santa Monica for 4 years. I'm on the Human Relations Council Santa Monica Bay Area Board, served on the city's audit subcommittee, and I could go on, but then we would be here for probably longer than we need to be. And it just, when I talk about my lived experience, it stems from the fact that my family and I were Jewish refugees who fled Belarus after the fall of the USSR. We came here with just a couple $100, and we were able to make a better life for ourselves. And I want to make sure that we're protecting those possibilities for the current generation of Santa Monicans, future generations of Santa Monicans. And big part of that, one of my top priorities is public safety. I know everyone says that, but because I was someone who had to live in fear, and we had to flee our home country because we didn't want to live in fear anymore, I understand that people are truly suffering from the fear of crime and what's going on here in Santa Monica. So I want to make sure that we're addressing it with smart solutions.
Mm-hmm. Cool. All right. So what are those? What are the smart solutions?
Smart solutions. So y'all actually had a really great article by the chief about a couple of weeks ago, I want to say. And he talked about the 21st century tools that are being put into place. So the stationary and moving cameras that are going to be doing license plate reading, checking who's, maybe illegally parked somewhere, kind of taking some of that load off of the police officers to free them up to do more important things. Another part of it, I think that we need to incentivize and work with our community neighbors to create and strengthen neighborhood watch programs. Because
so when you say community neighbors, you mean literally neighbors.
Literally neighbors.
You're not talking
literally
about neighboring
neighbors.
cities. You're talking about people.
I mean, we need to work with neighboring cities too on regional issues.
I just want to make sure we're clear on that. Yeah. So you're talking about working with neighbors to create neighborhood watch programs.
Yeah. And I think that part of that is to strengthen the relationships among our first responders and the neighbors, literally our, residents, because the more eyes that we have on the street, the safer it is. The more people that are paying attention to what's going on, the more people can report what issues they're seeing, they're experiencing, the more we can take that data and address what is actually happening. Because if we don't have that data, if people are thinking, oh, well, I got my catalytic converter stolen again, what's the point of reporting it? Well, then we don't know that it happened, so we can't address it. So, I think that is a part of it that's missing. And our neighborhood resource officers, I'm also on the Virginia Avenue Park Advisory Board, and every month at our meetings, we have a really great neighborhood resource officer as well as a civilian partner to that neighborhood resource officer.
There's 5 police officers who are assigned to regions of the city.
Yeah,
each of those officers has a non-sworn partner, for lack of a better term, who is a civilian employee who is part of that team and helps them with neighborhood-specific activities and focus.
Exactly. And I think that getting those types of updates are really helpful for me, and I think that they would be really helpful for other neighbors, because they might not know that all of these resources are being poured into trying to keep folks safe, and might not understand, well, if I don't report that my catalytic converter or my license plate has been stolen or something's been broken into or what have you, then we're not going to know it's an issue again. So that's part of it. The other thing is investing in other technologies that'll help leverage kind of, our police officers' time. So I really like the drone as a first responder program. I don't know if you watched the presentation that the chief gave to city council. I want to say it was a few months ago.
Yeah, maybe. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm intimately familiar with the drone program. Like,
Yeah.
I've been in there. I know, met Lashley, who flies it. Like, yes,
Oh, okay.
we know the drone.
Yeah. So like things like that. And, I think we can also find unique sources of funding for those types of public safety improvements, because there are grants out there available, maybe at the state level, at the federal level. And like, look, I'm not an expert in this. The thing is, we have the experts who can help advise us on how to best use those dollars.
Sure. So I guess a couple of things about both of those. I mean, we'll start with the one we just talked about. So like, leveraging new technology, great, absolutely. Lots of candidates come in, and lots of candidates have this answer of grants. Like, it's just a thing that I've, not in this unique to this election cycle. It's just a perpetual, like, candidate answers 101, find grant money. And so like, my response to that is always, cool, if it was out there, why didn't we apply for it already? Like, and so, what are you going to do to identify or find that grant or get it to happen, if it exists, that is beyond the capabilities or capacities of the current council members who are there to do that as we speak?
Well, I don't think it's the council members themselves that actually go out and find those grants. That's what staff does. And I think right now staff has a lot on their plates. We're still below staffing levels from pre-COVID levels. People are being asked to do a lot more with a lot less. And unfortunately, I think our current council majority has tended to pour things on top of what staff is already working on. And they get pulled from what they're trying to do, and here's another short-term goal and another short-term goal and another short-term goal, so they can't really focus on long-term progress. So for example, when the filing system in my brain is functioning. So when the budget process was going through, at the very end of it, one of the current council members proposed setting aside 4% of non-personnel general fund budget to allocate to the police department. And I'm not opposed to
it was Phil, wasn't it?
I believe so, yeah. And I'm not opposed to providing more funding to them if that's what they need. But I think that the way that came about really just it disrupted things in a not good way, because the city manager had no idea it was coming. It was at the very tail end of the budget cycle. And if this was a proposal that they had wanted to explore, it should have come up in the beginning. It shouldn't have been proposed right at the very end, where then the city manager had to figure out, well, what's that going to mean? Can you give us time to figure out what this means and come back to you with what impact it would have on the different departments? And so they ended up coming back 2 weeks later to explain, this is what would have to be cut from each department, because the non-personnel budget doesn't pay for personnel, but it pays for programs. And those several millions of dollars actually go to help Santa Monicans with things that, we are very grateful for and what we demand as citizens of this city, like great libraries, which are still, I know, below where we need to be on staffing levels. But they did end up luckily setting aside that proposal, and they put the parking tax measure on the ballot that they had rejected the previous meeting. So, that was a whole 2-week exercise that staff did not need to be put through. that
No,
time could have been used much more wisely.
but it also ended up with a ballot measure though that will fund. I mean, they're going to say it's going to fund public safety, like personal rent. Bullshit. It's not. It's going to fund the general fund, and like people can spend that wherever they want, right? It's non-binding. For these gets in the weeds for folks who are listening. Ballot measures have different kinds of ballot measures. If
Oh,
you're not at a
absolutely.
2/3 majority, your money's not set aside for any specific
Yes.
purpose. This is not 2/3, so we're going to increase the tax on parking places. That's going to go to the general fund. We're going to have an advisory measure that's non-binding that says, "Would you please put this money towards public safety?" Like, cool. My tone lets you know my attitude on that, which is like whatever. But the end, to your point, the end result of that system was theoretically a bunch more money for public safety,
Yeah,
right?
but we didn't need to go through that whole exercise of figuring out what we would need to cut when we had already had that opportunity to place that ballot or place that measure on the ballot that previous meeting.
But when it was
They had
placed on at the
rejected it.
previous meeting, it wasn't tied to public safety.
They had that option though. They
Yeah,
did have it was
someone could have said
discussed.
anything, right? But I guess where I'm coming from is like there's the process here was certainly last minute. Like I'm not saying it wasn't, but I do think there's something to be said for allowing folks when someone has an idea is somewhat beyond their control, right? Like if during the course of the meeting, you'd also I would argue that public events and perceptions move and change over time, right? And public safety has been a steadily increasing drumbeat in Santa Monica civic discourse, but I don't think it had reached fever pitch necessarily 6 or 8 months ago or even a year ago. I personally think it has been an increasing tone. So, like I said, I hear where you're coming from on that, and I can off the top of my head probably come up with 5 more examples of last minute stuff that's been thrown out at council meetings that's derailed discussions. But I guess if the end result is what is better for the city, is that not still a valid approach?
I mean, I'm glad that the ballot measure is placed on the ballot. I think that we should increase the parking taxes on private lots because that's going to bring in is anticipated to bring in $7 million more
Sure.
dollars annually. I think it's great. I think that the process should be important as well. And they actually did discuss in that initial meeting when they were talking about the budget and initially,
Mm-hmm.
discussing whether or not to put it on the ballot. Oh, can we have this go to public safety? What would we need to do? And they actually did have that concept of, oh, we could have an advisory measure. They were advised of that.
Yeah.
And they chose not to do it at that point. Like, I'm not saying I'm not happy that it got brought back and it did get put on the ballot. I'm just saying that was an exercise that we did not need to spend that much time on.
Sure. So then going back to so we're putting I say put a button on this, but finishing up this part of the conversation a little bit. There were 2 parts you brought up originally, right? This is only one of those. So one of the things that I'm taking away from this part of the conversation is, the question of how you're going to fund. Like, there's things you can do to fund public safety
Yeah.
that aren't necessarily staffing levels, right? You've talked about some of the other things, and I guess my takeaway from this is really that you're going to be looking for grant money on that. And I feel like I'm missing some of your other points on it. Like that's the part that's sticking in my head. So like, can you expand for me a little bit and give me a little bit more detail around how you're going to fund and or expand the public safety programs? Like the drone program is great. I agree. It's fantastic. Are you just saying let's find more money and make that bigger, or is there some sort? I feel like there's a philosophical approach here that you have that either I have missed or maybe hasn't quite been articulated yet.
Yeah. Well, thank you for asking it because it does actually give me a chance to elaborate a little bit more. I think that there is money that we are missing out on because we haven't been doing as much enforcement of certain things as we could be. So, for example, our Airbnb or short-term rental ordinance. Luckily, we are implementing new software that's going to help the code enforcement officers be able to enforce that better because it's going to literally sift through all of the listings and let them know which ones are illegal so somebody doesn't have to spend all that time going through it by hand. And then those fines. I obviously don't have the figures off the top of
Yeah,
my
I'm
head
not
of how
expecting
much,
you to
but
have that. Yeah.
yeah. Um, but that is a potential, revenue stream, which I wish we didn't have, because I wish nobody broke that home sharing ordinance law, but it is what it is. The other thing is, you know, this one's kind of silly, but enforcing certain traffic laws. So I cannot tell you how many cars, how many drivers I have seen just run stop signs
Mm-hmm.
anywhere that I'm walking. Like I walk my dog. I live in the Pico neighborhood. I walk my dog through the Pico neighborhood. I walk my dog through Sunset Park. Sometimes I just go for a walk. There are so many people that just run those stop signs. I've joked with people before that if we just had an officer sitting at the corner of like Stewart and Kansas, they would make so much money off of tickets from drivers who don't stop at the stop signs. And a piece of that is, I think that our officers are having to spend, well, yes, they're understaffed, that's a piece of it, but they're also having to spend a lot of time and energy on things that maybe others might be better equipped to deal with, like mental health issues. And I do know that we have some programs to
Mm-hmm.
help with that, um, but I want to see how we can better utilize those resources to free up officers' time.
Got it. And again, it feels like I'm nitpicking of candidates on this, but like it just comes for me. This kind of conversation keeps coming back to like, yeah, officers are doing a bunch of other stuff that's not stop signs. We do stop sign enforcement periodically. We used to watch them once a month or so get a bunch of people outside our old office right where the freeway exit was. But again, this philosophical approach of sort of like looking for hidden efficiencies, I guess is the category that it falls into in my brain. I come back to it. That doesn't, I don't know if that answer is satisfying to voters, because what voters I think are looking for is some, again, this is my opinion, but I think they're looking for some sort of concrete definition and explanation of the crime problem, and some solutions that are changes to policy or procedures. Like saying we're going to free up officer time, great. So maybe another way to phrase this is like, and this links back to what you were saying in the beginning with your sort of the neighborhood watch approach. Like, cool, neighborhood watch is great, but if people are still committing crimes, if people are coming to the city and committing crimes, that awareness, that feeling, that sense of public safety, I don't know how satisfying people find an answer of, well, let's free up officer resources and have them look at it in a different way. Like, I know kind of what I'm hoping for out of candidates is like policy changes or proposals that are going to lead to directly to some sort of change in the public perception. And I'm not invalidating what you're saying, but I am sort of hammering people to try and get very specific policy level discussions around what are we going to do around these issues, right? And I'll give you the good example of the eyes on the street is like, I can't tell you how many times we called the police at my former office. Maybe not every day, that's an exaggeration, but every week for sure. All the time we called the police. And sometimes they showed up, sometimes they didn't. When they showed up, what they could do was limited. And to be blunt, like the quality of life crimes on that block at no point in time decreased because we were watching them all the time. It simply didn't. Like our awareness of it, our camera pointed at it, like none of that made a difference. And so what I'm curious about is, so what ideas do you have that would go beyond saying report it more? Because I reported it all the time. I have the app is one of my favorite. I reported it. I reported encampments. We reported squatting. We reported dead bodies. We reported multiple fights, drug sales, prostitution, camping, like picket, crime. We reported it. And the situation on the block didn't get better. So how are we going to deal with that?
So if I may ask you, why do you think it didn't get better?
I mean, it didn't get better for all kinds of reasons. I mean, it didn't get better because we weren't fundamentally addressing the fact of the criminality on the street. Like, there are people on the street engaging in all kinds of illegal behavior, and they felt comfortable enough to do it, not just in front of us, but in front of everybody. Like, I have photos of people shooting up with needles in the walkways going into the hotels. Like, eyes on them didn't make any difference. They just didn't care. And so again, it's like, what can we do about that, right? Like, eyes on didn't work. People being cited didn't really work. Like, people being arrested didn't work. Our office, I had to go to court twice. I was subpoenaed twice in the last 6 months. Once for an attempted murder case. I guess the other one's assault with a deadly weapon, right? Like, people got arrested, and it kept happening. So I guess this is where I'm coming from. My long-winded rant here is a little bit about, like, do you have an idea that you can pitch to me that would make me feel like it would result in that block becoming safer?
Well, I think to your point, y'all were there for years and years and years, and it didn't feel like it got any better. Did it feel like it got worse?
Yep. Well, yeah, I should say yep. I mean, our block is also where the train station was built, right? So pre-train station, it's a vacant area, right? So, like, I'm not someone that says the train causes crime, but, like, when you go from a vacant lot where nobody is to bringing it to a lot that has hundreds, if not thousands, of people walking through it, stuff increases. But yeah, absolutely. COVID changed things. There's lots of things that changed, but yeah, I don't think anyone would argue that it has gotten worse over the 10 years when we were there.
Yeah,
but consistently, it's not like it was great for 5 and then shit for 5. It's been consistently getting worse.
Yeah, and I think to that point, it's not just one solution, right? So eyes on the street, that's a piece of it. Technology, that's a piece of it. Staffing up our officers, that's another piece of it. There's a lot of aspects to it. So we need to look at it through that entire lens of, well, why are people committing crimes? Are they shooting up because they have substance abuse issues and are not able to get into the care that they need to get off of drugs? Is it that they don't want to? Is it that something traumatic happened and they don't have any other way to cope? Is it that we don't know? So I think without having that underlying, understanding of why these crimes are occurring, we won't be able to solve it. So I think, we need to dig into that data. And I don't know what data is available to us. There was a study that I very briefly saw on RAND's website about using data and what types of data is needed to have better public safety solutions. And like, I don't remember the entire study from the top of my head right now, but I think that we need to use that data to develop the policies that are going to help. And I'm not an expert in in the work that first responders do. I like to analyze data and figure out what it means and figure out what are the risks of this solution versus possible benefits, and how do we put it together in a way that helps get us to closer to where we want to be. And I think part of that is also just that it's not going to happen overnight. We're never gonna, it's going to take time. And it's very challenging for people because when it feels like it's getting worse, when it feels like you walk out onto the street and you're worried about your personal safety or your child's safety, your family's safety, what have you, you get frustrated and you want solutions now, not solutions that are going to work over the course of several years or several months or whatever it might be, whatever the timeline is.
And so I can connect this to another question that I've been asking all the candidates that come in, which is, you ask why was it getting worse in that block, or just fundamentally, why was that block so bad, right? This 1600 block of 5th Street. Our block was so bad because we were across the street from the city's largest homeless shelter, and specifically the services it provides, not so much the shelter. That's why the block was so bad, because for 10 years, we watched people go and take the services from the service center, and then we watched the percentage of those people come across and commit crimes. We watched them harass women in our parking lot. We watched one of them stab our security guard. We watched one of them try and set fire to our building. Like, we watched people. There's a direct connection between people flowing to the services center and a percentage, not all, but a percentage flowing out from the services center. And because they had all been clustered there, some of them, a higher percentage than would be in the regular world, committed crimes. And crimes of varying levels, right? Like whether it was just defecating in the street or whether it was trying to, our building was broken into multiple times. Like that's the reason why our block was so bad. And it leads me to the question I ask all the candidates, which is like, do you think Santa Monica draws homeless people to it? Do you think we are a magnet that brings in homeless folk from around the region? And then the follow-up to that is, if we are doing that, should we stop? Should that be a concern to us? And should we have policies that address that magnetic pull? But that's a follow-up to if you think it's even happening or not.
I mean, even experts who have studied this, like academics who have studied this, say there is some connection, but it also has to do with the fact that it is a regional issue. Homelessness isn't just a Santa Monica problem, it's also a problem across all of LA County and, quite frankly, across California.
Mm-hmm.
And if Santa Monica is doing things, but our neighbors are not, then that's the real problem, because then if folks don't have the resources they need in the community where they live, whether or not they're housed, they're going to go to where they can get those services if they're
competent to be mobile, right?
Yeah,
some people aren't.
Yeah, some people aren't, but yeah. Well, and we have to work on this at a regional level, because Santa Monica has done, I think, more than its fair share on homelessness. We've been first in creating so many of the policies that are now not copied, but
No, you're absolutely correct. There are things that the city has done that we've done a lot for. I mean, for better and worse, right? We were the poster child for things like the builder's remedy, but we've done a lot. Our Airbnb ordinance, while not enforced to the maximum, was a model for lots of other places.
Yeah,
right? Like
and West Hollywood took it and they built on it and they refined it, and I think we can also learn from them. And yeah, exactly.
And you've got, and I've said this before, Santa Monica actually does a good, not perfect, but actually does a very good job of preventing folks from falling into homelessness. A lot of our subsidy and support programs are good, and more people should have those, right?
Yeah.
Like I definitely agree with that. But I guess I come back to this notion of, and you've alluded to it, which is that if we are the ones who are doing a bunch of stuff and other people aren't, that creates a world where we do end up pulling folks in. And at what point has the city exhausted its responsibility on this front? And it's a thorny question, right? Because you've got morals and ethics as well as practical budgetary concerns, right? Like, and no one, you come across as cruel if you broach the notion that we are doing so much to cater to the most destitute and the most harmed, that we start to decrease the quality of life for people who fundamentally have more than those people. Like, that is the moral equation. But I also think residents are voting, and I think a lot of people are going to think that if they're not going to say it out loud. And so that's what I'm kind of curious to know from candidates is like, how do you square this moral quandary? Or is it even a moral quandary? Because some of the candidates don't think it is. They think hell for leather, the services are the way to go, and there's no moral quandary whatsoever. If you bring people in, that's fine because we have a moral responsibility to do so. So I guess where do you fall on that scale? Do you think there is a point where we are doing too much is the wrong phrase, where we've reached our capacity and our limit, and in which case we would need to reduce what we're doing? Or do you think, A, do you think there is a limit, and B, if you do think there's a limit, how close to it are we?
I don't know what the limit would be if there is one. Like, just being honest, I don't know.
Yeah, it's fine.
I think that what we need to do is figure out a way to force other people, and by other people I mean neighboring communities, maybe CD11, to do their fair share. I know that there is a West Side Cities organization that comes together that works on things, collaboratively.
Yep.
I don't know how successful it's been at implementing in the types of policies and making sure that they are getting implemented across the board. Santa Monica is, I would I would say a leader in developing things like supportive housing.
Mm-hmm.
Where are the other cities on that? Are they also building enough supportive housing for their population of people experiencing homelessness? And I think the other piece of it, when we're talking about what services we provide and to who, we focus so much on people with the most severe acuities,
Mm-hmm.
people who have really significant substance abuse issues to the point where they can't function anymore without the drugs. People whose mental health issues have been exacerbated to the point that they are, standing on the street corner yelling at nothing and
Mm-hmm.
scaring people around them. We forget that a lot of people who are experiencing homelessness are not part of that population.
Yep. Absolutely. No,
Yeah.
I don't dispute that for a second. Don't dispute that for a second. There's a whole cadre of folks who don't cause problems. Absolutely. But there's also the percentage that do, right?
Yeah.
And like, I guess that's one of the questions is that how do we parse that? How do we pull that apart? How do we deal with that? I mean, 2/3 of the people our police department arrests are homeless. Like 2/3 of our arrestees are homeless. Like unquestionably, the homeless population is tied to the local crime rate because 2/3 of the people we arrest are homeless. And that leads to questions around resources, right? Like if our police department spent less time dealing with some of the homeless situations, if our fire department spent less time on EMS calls for homeless folks who have what should be preventable medical problems, they would have more money to do other things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think this is just I think it's the topic du jour. I think it's the only question. Like I know this topic is the only topic people ask us about when we go out in public. Like not that aren't other issues.
No, but it's a priority.
It's literally the only thing we get asked about. Sometimes they lead in with something else that they're mad about, and then it immediately turns into homelessness. But just like such a homelessness and crime and the intersection of the two are like the big deal. We have spent a lot of time on it though. So
Yeah.
Was there other things you wanted to talk about on this subject, or should we move on to some other things?
Just very quickly on homelessness, it's I support basically an improv approach, a yes and. We can't just focus, like I mentioned, we can't just focus on people with the most severe acuities. We have to focus on prevention as well as treating those folks and treating everyone in between. So, yes, we need permanent supportive housing. Yes, we need transitional housing. Yes, we need vouchers. Yes, we need all of the things in order to be able to make real progress on it. And I will note that according to the city, homelessness did go down 6% this year. So, and
Sure.
I recognize there are limitations with the data that we have available to us, but
yeah, and we don't have to spend a bunch of time nitpicking the data because I'll go down
we'll go down down far too many rabbit holes. So we can.
But you were right. The homeless count. Put everyone who's going to get mad about this conversation. Put all the asterisks on that you want. There's a bunch of stuff. But the homeless count did report 50 people less, I think was the raw number, like give or take, on the streets this year than the previous count. Lots of asterisks, but that's fine.
Yeah.
Cool.
So moving on to the next topic.
Did you have something else you wanted to bring up? Or I can pitch other things, but was there something you specifically wanted to talk about that that wasn't crime and homelessness?
I mean, I would really love to talk about sustainability and the environment and economic recovery, but I mean, those are all different things.
Well, sustainability and the environment are not really that different.
Sustainability and the environment are one bucket. Yep. Economic recovery is another.
Pick one. Which one you want to go to?
Ooh, good question. Let's go with economic recovery.
Okay. City's a god-awful place to do business, and it has been for decades. I mean, just straight, it has been, right? It absolutely has been. I
literally pulled up. You guys wrote a great piece on the cost of doing business. I pulled up the actual study because I wanted to understand it.
We've reported on permitting problems for a long time, and to be blunt, the city administration and leadership has hell for leather tried to pretend it wasn't a problem or tell us we were over exaggerating it or what have you. And study says we were right. So we were right. The business owners were right when they complained. It's just been a perpetual problem. So when we get into economic recovery, I guess, one of them is going to be talking about this, but what are your thoughts on economic recovery? What would you do to spur the local economy? What are your priorities as it relates to generating more revenue for the city?
So First, we know that Santa Monica's big driver of just our Santa Monica's big economic driver has been tourism.
Yep.
And during COVID, that obviously took a huge nosedive.
Yep.
And we still haven't fully recovered. So, like any good investment, we need to diversify. We need to draw in new types of businesses. We also need to recognize that there are effects from just changing, changing economics, like people doing more shopping online. E-commerce is a big part
Mm-hmm.
of pulling people away from going to a physical store to buy things. So we need to look at how we can incentivize more experiential businesses. So I know that we've got like a mini golf course coming in on 3rd Street
Mm-hmm.
Promenade, which I'm actually very excited about. I think that we should also take a look at how we can implement entertainment zones. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know if you're familiar with that state bill. I need to
Mm-hmm.
finish reading up about it, but it would be really great if we could make 3rd Street Promenade an entertainment zone so that people could, walk around the promenade without having to, leave their beverage in
Yeah.
one place or
Yeah.
another.
So for folks, just
That's
so we clear for
oh
folks
yeah,
listening who
sorry.
don't. So when we talk, what we're talking about here is a series of zoning and permitting changes that would take an area, in this case the promenade, and open it up for predominantly the big thing is alcohol service, right? So you can move around between. It's sort of like a giant beer garden, for lack of a better term. But the idea would be you then couple that with um, businesses or venues that cater to that. So whether that's live music or entertainment venues or other restaurants or stuff that makes it
Yeah,
a place that's a festival-like atmosphere.
yeah.
Um,
Try like we need to attract people down there. And I'm not saying that there aren't already like some people down there. It just depends on what time and what's going on. When Pride was going on, it was a huge festival. There were so many people there. So how can we recreate that maybe on a smaller scale more regularly? The other part of it is I think that we need a citywide business advisory committee because we have the Chamber of Commerce. They can tell us how they're feeling, what they think
mhm.
on certain policies. We have individual business owners and folks who run multiple businesses, but there's not really a unified voice saying we as the business community, this is specifically what we need across the city.
Mm-hmm. Nope, they have. Yeah, I agree. I see where you're coming from that. Going back to what you said earlier a little bit. So you talked about diversifying from tourism, but entertainment zone is sort of fundamentally a tourism thing. Like that's about visitors. Like no resident can go to those places. Residents can only go to those so much, right? Like you can't eat and drink out every night. So those I think are fundamentally are about tourism and visitors. So do you can I setting that aside for a second, did
Yeah,
you have some ideas for businesses and economic development that were entirely separate from tourism?
yeah. So I think we need to reclaim our mantle of Silicon Beach. I know we had a lot of kind of tech companies. Yeah, we still have quite a few tech companies, but we need to figure out how we can incentivize those types of businesses to come to Santa Monica. Do we need more incubator spaces? Do we need incentives for property owners of vacant storefronts to rent to people who otherwise might not be able to afford it but really want to start a business? I think that incentives, generally speaking, work better than mandates, and incentives can speak to what people need in order to make a business happen, in order to keep it going. Um,
So
So
okay,
sorry. Yeah.
well, I mean, this office was a failed tech company. That's why we're here. The furniture we have is because a different tech company failed and we scavenged it. Like the idea that the tech companies the boom may be over when, if not over that they moved on. Like I see that. I guess where I want to go with that is what do you think made the city attractive to that class of business? Let's call it pre-COVID, right? Because COVID, so many things changed. But pre-COVID, what were the elements of Santa Monica that were drawing those kinds of Silicon Beach tech companies to this area?
I mean, I think it's partly the reputation and the environment. And by environment, I mean it's a place people want to be. Santa Monica's beautiful. I yesterday I was on the pier for locals night, and with the sun setting over the pier, I was just like, we get to see this every day if we want to. We're so incredibly lucky. People literally travel thousands and thousands of miles to come and watch this sunset. Well, obviously not just to watch the sunset, but that kind of thing. It had this, Santa Monica has had this vibe in the past of, this is going to make me sound old, but like being a hip and happening place. And tech companies, young people, folks who have those types of creative mindsets and entrepreneurial spirits want to be part of that kind of community. So, part of it is figuring out how do we get that back.
Which was my question, was then how do you reclaim that, right? Like, because I agree, there was a vibe, there was a feeling, there was a sensibility about the city that I do think has been lost, and I think part of it is many, many factors, of which crime and homelessness are a part, but so are, like you said earlier, the lingering impacts of COVID, right? Like, it just changed so many different things. So I guess that's where I was going with it, is like, how do we get that back? And so on the business front, it's incentives, and I get that, and doing those kinds of things. But I guess, are there cultural ideas that you might be putting forward to try and help change or refurbish the city's reputation to reacquire that luster that would therefore bring in the businesses?
I think there's probably a lot, and it's kind of a big question to answer in just a short period of time. But I think maybe starting with changing the narrative around how Santa Monica is seen publicly, because there have been a lot of stories about crime, about people not feeling safe, about this, that, and the other thing. But we haven't really put it into the greater context. Is what's happening in Santa Monica so much worse than what's happening in every other city? Is this a Santa Monica specific issue, or is this a, global, maybe not global, but is it a regional or California or United States wide thing that we are experiencing? And I would argue that it is more of a overall, like, not market phenomenon, but it's a more national or regional trend, not just Santa Monica specific. So I think if we can change the narrative, put those things in context, and show people what we do have to offer. We have this incredible weather in the midst of insane climate change, and it being like, I think Phoenix broke the record for the longest number of days in a row over 100 degrees. It's 64 today. I mean, it feels like 76 with the humidity, according to my Google, but just our weather, our vibe.
Yeah. So let's transition from that into the environment side of things as well, right? Because the weather and the environment connected enough. You also mentioned the pier, which is a huge, it's not an environmental disaster, that's too strong, but it is dirty and perpetually unclean. Like, every single year, it's always on the beach bummer list.
The beach, not the actual pier. Okay, just itself. To clarify, because the pier itself is fantastic, and they're constantly trying to think
the sand underneath it, and 100 yards in each direction. But so, like, environmentally and sustainability, you did want to touch on that. So, like,
I would love to, but if you said one thing, so, so we just passed new sustainable building codes, which is very exciting. So I think that we need to approach our policies just through a sustainability lens, because we are and want to be a sustainable city. Again, we've been first on so many things. We literally have composting toilets in City Hall East. I think part of bringing back the economy, marrying that with sustainability, is getting sustainability focused tech companies here. I know we have some already, but what can we do to incentivize more of them to come here? We had the zero emissions delivery zone pilot program.
Actually, I don't even know where that stands at the moment.
Yeah, right? Exactly.
So what, for folks who don't realize, we set aside certain parking spots, for lack of a better term, for EVs and zero emission vehicles, so that they could take stuff from point A to point B and pull up right in front. Nutshell of what it was.
Yeah.
I don't even remember where that is now. Is that still ongoing?
I don't know. I think the pilot program finished, but I don't know if we've had a summary of what we learned from it.
Yeah, if there is, I don't remember it.
Yeah, exactly, same. So, if we're doing a pilot program of anything, we should take the information that we learn from it and use it to apply it to make better policies. So if, depending on what it is that the outcomes were, if it showed, more people were able to get deliveries with, using vehicles that were zero emissions instead of, polluting, greenhouse gas emitting, gas powered cars or other vehicles, then how can we make that happen across the city or in a larger space? And then how can we publicize that to companies that are focused on that type of business? I mean, like I know that we definitely want to move to being a more, we already are, but being a more bike friendly and pedestrian friendly city, because people should have the choice of whether or not they want to drive. They shouldn't just have to drive by default. So if they do have to make a choice to drive, maybe they don't need a car full time. Maybe we can have some more electric car sharing or things like that. Maybe there is some company that wants to test out or has a successful program with electric car sharing that wants to come into Santa Monica, and we can develop some sort of program so that residents can have access to that for when they do need a car. I think that there's, a lot of little things we can do on that. Just on the other thing on the environment is, like, 70% of our residents are renters and don't have that choice themselves to do things like put solar panels on or move to more sustainable at-home practices. And we can give out all of the low flow shower heads and LED lights we want, but we need to make sure that people are using them and understand why it's important. And I think we can also work with, for example, since so many of our residents are renters and a lot of them are living in rent controlled homes, we can work with the rent control board to help develop incentives for landlords of those buildings to make them more energy efficient.
Got it. Cool.
There actually are some really cool rebate programs. I may have gone down a rabbit hole yesterday on the SoCal Edison website, and I was very confused. So maybe we also need someone to help folks navigate that system.
Sure. So we're running up against time.
Yep, sorry.
No, you're good. I want to make sure you guys finish your thought on that. So why don't you you want to give a closing statement? You give them folks your final pitch?
Sure. Yeah. Got my notes. So we have had 4 years of empty promises, and the council majority who is currently in power promised us safer streets, promised us to end homelessness and to clean up the neighborhoods. And I don't think that they have been very successful at it. I don't know why. I don't know what they were doing those 4 years. But we do need change. We need the right kind of change. We started this off talking about crime. I'm not going to be tough on crime or soft on crime. I'm going to be smart on crime. I'm going to work collaboratively with our first responders to develop the strategies that actually will work. And to our earlier conversation, I don't have all of that information yet. And that's something that I look forward to exploring and developing better policies around. In my day job, I am a financial analyst, as I mentioned. So I have the capability and the skills to look at the budget and to understand how it works. It's several hundred pages. It's a lot. But I'm ready to take on that challenge. I've served on the city's audit subcommittee. I currently serve on the Transient Occupancy Tax Advisory Committee. I've been serving this city for over a decade. And I'm ready to serve the people of Santa Monica as their next council member. And I hope folks will be able to look beyond the box that others have tried to put me in, because I don't really fit into a box. Learn a bit more about me, and hopefully I'll earn their votes this November.
Cool. All right. Thanks for coming
Yeah.
by. We appreciate
Thank
it.
you so much.